Ella Davis had experienced better days. She grew up in an affluent neighborhood of Boston, an only child doted on by her parents. College had been a breeze, and by her late 20s, she had found herself in a comfortable job as a marketing executive and married to the man of her dreams, Derek. But as the years passed, the dream had faded, revealing an ever-growing nightmare. Derek, once her pillar of support, had become volatile, possessive, and consumed by irrational jealousy. After a particularly nasty fight, Ella gathered her courage and sought a divorce. The papers were finalized only a few months ago, and now at 32, she was trying to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She moved to Chicago to be closer to her parents, found a new job, and tried her best to start anew. But the haunting memories of Derek's angry outbursts persisted, threatening the fragile peace she had built. On this particular Saturday morning, Ella decided to step out to the local Walmart. There was a massive sale, and the opportunity to change her old memories with new ones was alluring. As she walked into the store, the chaotic bustle of shoppers, each hunting for the best deals, enveloped her. She navigated through the crowd, jotting down items on her shopping list: towels, a kettle, curtains, some kitchenware. Deep in thought, Ella didn't notice a familiar figure lurking just a few steps behind her, his gaze locked onto her. Derek had not taken the divorce well. Rage had consumed him, making him believe that if he couldn't have Ella, then no one else should. He had followed her to Chicago, living off the grid, and every so often, he would get close enough to watch her, always ensuring she never saw him. While Ella was engrossed in the aisles, picking out a curtain pattern, she felt the hair on her neck stand up, a creeping sensation of being washed over her. She brushed it off, attributing it to the noise and the crowd. Minutes later, in the kitchen appliances section, Ella thought she saw a familiar shadow out of the corner of her eye. Heart pounding, she whipped around, but it was just a man with his young daughter, the little girl laughing and tugging at her father's sleeve. Paranoia, she chided herself, trying to shake off the unease. Derek is miles away. You're safe. But Derek was closer than she imagined. He carefully maneuvered through the aisles, always keeping her in sight, hiding behind displays when she turned or looked around. The noise and crowd were a blessing in disguise for him. In the grocery section, Ella felt it again. The oppressive sensation of eyes on her. This time, she decided to be more cautious. She intentionally paused, pretending to examine some pasta brands, using the reflection from the metallic packaging to scan the crowd behind her. A figure quickly moved out of her line of sight. Alarm bells rang in her head. She needed to be sure. Ella hatched a plan on the spot. She'd ask a store employee to make an announcement, calling her by a false name, to see if the lurking figure would react. As she approached the customer service desk, she almost ran into a woman. Apologizing profusely, she failed to notice Derek, who had momentarily lost track of her. Panicking, he quickly scanned the store. Ella whispered to the employee, who nodded and made the announcement. "Miss Sarah Mitchell, your party is waiting at the checkout." Ella hid behind a pillar, eyes darting around to catch any unusual reactions. From his vantage point, Derek didn't react. The name meant nothing to him, but he was desperate to find her. He began moving more brazenly, searching for her. Seeing no obvious reactions, Ella's paranoia seemed unfounded. She decided to proceed to the checkout. But as she approached, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hesitantly, she answered. A voice rasped on the other end. "You think you can escape from me?" Ella's blood ran cold. It was Derek. Before she could react, a hand grabbed her arm. She turned to see a concerned-looking older woman. "Dear," she whispered, pointing subtly. Following the woman's finger, Ella's eyes widened in horror. There, just a few feet away, was Derek, staring right at her, his eyes filled with rage. But the crowded store worked in Ella's favor. Before Derek could move, the older woman pulled her into a nearby crowd. The woman, a retired cop named Carol, had noticed Derek's suspicious behavior and had intervened just in time. As they navigated through the chaos, they alerted store security. Within moments, alarms blared and the store was in lockdown mode. Derek tried to blend in, but his anxious demeanor gave him away. As security approached Derek, they quickly identified that he had a restricted warrant out for his arrest due to multiple violations of a restraining order Ella had filed against him. They apprehended him before he could flee, Ella, shaken but safe, turned to Carol. The two women, strangers minutes ago, now shared an unbreakable bond. The nightmare was over, and in the midst of terror, Ella had found a guardian angel. Months later, with Derek behind bars, Ella often reflected on that fateful day. It was a chilling reminder of the past she had left behind, but it also solidified her resolve to rebuild her life, ever thankful for the strangers who could turn into saviors in a heartbeat. I remember my father's words, spoken to me when I was just a young boy. Son, he would say, holding his shaking hands over the fireplace, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it usually is. This memory stands out more than most, perhaps because of the grave look in his eyes, or maybe due to the circumstances of that very day, when he fell prey to a robbery, leaving him forever changed. Now, as an elderly man, those words still echoed in my mind. Retired and living a life of relative solitude in a quiet neighborhood of New Orleans, I kept my world small and simple. I lost Marie, my dear wife, 3 years ago, and since then, my only companionship came from my adult children and grandchildren visiting occasionally. The sun was shining brightly as I entered Walmart that fateful midday. I'd come to pick up some medications and a few household supplies, hoping to spend no more than 20 minutes. As I slowly pushed my cart into the healthcare aisle, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was a slight sensation, one that's indescribable, almost as if I was being watched. As I grabbed a box of painkillers, I saw a man in a black jacket at the corner of the aisle staring at me. He was average in build, but there was something in his eyes that sent chills down my spine. Trying not to overthink, I moved to the next aisle. Yet when I turned the corner, another man, distinctively recognizable with a scar running across his cheek, was standing at the other end, seemingly watching me. My father's words came rushing back, and paranoia began to set in. I thought about abandoning my shopping and heading straight for the exit, but I didn't want to appear scared or easy prey. So I decided to test my theory. I randomly switched aisles, walked back and forth, and even went into sections where I had no intention of buying anything. But regardless of where I went, either one of the two men or both were there, a distance away, watching me. Their silent stalking began to feel like a suffocating web. Heart pounding, I made my way to the electronics section, hoping the area's staff might deter them. But to my horror, I spotted a third man, this one tall and lanky, chatting with the other two. They whispered among themselves, occasionally throwing glances my way. My mind raced. What did they want? Why were they following an old man around Walmart in broad daylight? I could feel fear coursing through my veins, but I wasn't about to let these men see me crumble. I contemplated yelling or seeking help, but then I remembered an old trick Marie and I would use when we felt we were in an unfamiliar or potentially dangerous situation. We call each other, even if we were together, to give an illusion that someone else was aware of our whereabouts. Taking a deep breath, I dialed my son Brian. "Dad," he answered. "Bri," I whispered, trying to mask the fear in my voice. "I'm at Walmart, and I think I'm being followed. There are 3 men. They're watching me." Silence. Then Brian responded, "Stay calm, Dad. Pretend you're talking to a friend. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Can you go on?" I nodded, then remembered he couldn't see me. Yes, I managed. For the next agonizing minutes, I continued my Fox conversation with Brian, meandering around the store, but the feeling of being hunted persisted. The 3 predators seemed amused, edging closer, their whispers louder, their laughs more sinister. Then the lanky one broke away from the group and began to approach me. My heart raced, my palms were sweaty. All I could think of was, what did they want? As he drew nearer, I felt a hand slipping into my pocket. The man with the scar was attempting to steal my wallet. Suddenly, I heard a voice, louder and more commanding. "Hey!" Brian stormed down the aisle, flanked by 2 security guards. The 3 men, sensing trouble, tried to scatter, but the guards quickly apprehended them. Turns out, they were known for such petty thefts, using intimidation and fear. They would corner their victims, scare them, and then pilfer what they could, hoping to get away before their prey even realized what was happening. Relief washed over me when I realized the true nature of the situation. I was indeed in danger, but not the mortal kind I had feared. However, The emotions, the fear, and the paranoia I felt were as real as could be. I hugged Brian, thanking him. We left Walmart together, but the episode left me shaken. It wasn't just about a potential stolen wallet, it was about losing a sense of safety. For days afterward, every shadow, every unexpected noise, every unfamiliar face sent my heart racing. The trauma of being stalked, even if only for a short while, lingered. But in time, and with Brian's support, I regained my confidence. The world was not just filled with predators, it had protectors too. And as I once again walked the aisles of Walmart, the memories fading, I remembered my father's words. The world was indeed filled with dangers, but also with love, hope, and people ready to stand up against the shadows. The world knew me as Emily Miller, a quiet young woman from a small town in Virginia. Now navigating the bustling streets of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, life had its fair share of twists for me. Growing up, my family was mostly absent, always caught up in some issue or another. This constant feeling of abandonment led me to grasp onto relationships tighter than most. By 24, I was living in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Pittsburgh with my boyfriend, Mark. On the surface, Mark was every woman's dream, tall, dark, and intimidatingly handsome. But over time, I'd come to realize that the intimidating part wasn't just a look, it was real. Mark had a terrifying temper. He'd occasionally grab my arm, leaving the constellation of bruises or shout so loudly that our neighbors would send worried looks my way. I'd always explain them away. Oh, I'm just clumsy. Or, you know how thin these walls are. The night in question was ordinary enough. We planned a quick trip to Walmart to pick up some groceries and essentials. As usual, Mark was in a foul mood, aggravated over some minor issue at work. It was past 10 p.m. when we parked in a remote corner of the Walmart parking lot, away from the main entrance and the few cars that were still there. The overhead lights were dim, casting a sickly yellow hue, making the empty carts and random litter feel even more ominous. We forgot the shopping list, Mark hissed, his face contorted in that familiar anger. Don't worry, I remember most of the items. I tried to placate him, the grip on my purse tightening. My heart raced, knowing that anything could set him off. He turned to face me, the intensity of his gaze making my breath catch. You always mess up, Emily. Do you know how sick I am of your excuses? Tears welled up, but I fought them back. This wasn't new. But in that secluded parking spot, I felt trapped. Mark, I promise, it'll be okay. Suddenly, he lunged at me, hands reaching for my throat. Panic coursed through me. The sharp edges of the key in my hand became my only salvation. Without thinking, I thrust it at him, catching his forearm. Mark howled in pain, drawing back. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough for a moment's respite. Ruin, my brain screamed. Stumbling out of the car, I made a desperate dash towards the Walmart entrance, the dim lights of the parking lot casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to chase me. Behind, Mark's furious shouts echoed. My lungs burned, each breath felt like a razor, but the fear propelled me forward. The entrance slid open, revealing the sanitized brightness of Walmart. I sprinted towards the nearest aisle, hoping to lose him amidst the towering shelves. My mind raced. There were security personnel, right? Or some form of help. From a distance, Mark's menacing voice pierced the ambient hum of the supermarket. Emily, you can't hide forever. Crouching behind an aisle of cereals, heart hammering in my chest. Paranoia gripped me. Every squeak of a trolley wheel, every hushed conversation of the few shoppers left, felt like a harbinger of doom. Suddenly, a hand clamped on my shoulder. I nearly screamed, but it was just an elderly lady. Dear, are you all right? You look pale, she said, genuine concern in her eyes. I opened my mouth to reply, but the words caught in my throat. Even if I explained, would she understand? Would she even believe me? The loudspeaker overhead crackled to life. Security to aisle 7, please. That was the next aisle over. Mark had found me. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the lady's arm. Please, I need help. My boyfriend, he's trying to hurt me. Her eyes widened, and without a word, she led me towards the back of the store. We snaked through aisles and finally ended up in the employees' area, where she introduced me to a tall, burly man, her son, a security guard. He's after me, I panted, explaining the situation in hurried words. His eyes hardened. Stay here. I'll handle this. Minutes turned to hours, or so it felt. The old woman, Mrs. Collins, tried to calm me down, her warm hand patting mine. But the terror was too real, the paranoia too consuming. Suddenly, the back door burst open. Mark, disheveled and wild-eyed, loomed in the doorway. Behind him, the other guards were struggling to keep up. He made a step towards me, but Mrs. Collins' son stood firm, blocking his way. A tense standoff ensued, every second stretching endlessly, until finally, police sirens wailed outside, piercing the night. Mark was handcuffed, his furious glare never leaving me as they led him away. As it turned out, there had been multiple reports against him, not just for me. The police had been building the case, but nothing solid had come up until now. Mrs. Collins wrapped an arm around me, comforting me as my world shifted. It's over, she whispered. It took weeks for the paranoia to fade, for every shadow to not resemble Mark, for every loud noise to not be a trigger. But with the help of therapy and newfound friends, I rebuilt my life.